She's been difficult lately, someone whispered near the coffee machine. I froze mid-reach for a mug. The voice belonged to Amanda from accounting. She didn't know I was standing right behind the partition wall. Brandon said she's unstable, another voice added. He's worried about her mental state. Brandon. My husband. Talking about me to people I worked with every single day. My hand trembled as I set down the mug. I walked back to my desk without coffee, without making a sound. My computer screen blurred as I stared at it. The spreadsheet I'd been working on meant nothing anymore. All morning, I noticed things I'd missed before. Co-workers glancing away when I approached. Conversations stopping when I entered rooms. The sympathetic head tilts from people who suddenly treated me like I was fragile. He'd been talking. For how long? To how many people? And what exactly had he told them? I pulled up my email and started typing a message to my sister. Then I deleted it. If Brandon was building a narrative about my instability, I couldn't give him ammunition. No emotional outbursts. No public crying. No proof that I was anything except completely fine. But inside, everything was breaking. The screenshot arrived at 2:47 p.m. from Patricia, a woman I barely knew from the third floor. Her message was simple: thought you should see this. The image showed a text conversation between Brandon and Patricia's husband, Derek. They played basketball together on weekends. Brandon's message read, Claire's been really unstable lately. I'm worried about her. She's not herself. I think she might need help. Derek had responded with concern. Brandon had replied with more details, painting me as someone teetering on the edge of something dark and dangerous. I read it 3 times. Then I saved the screenshot to 3 different locations. My hands were steady now. The initial shock had transformed into something colder, sharper. If he was telling strangers this version of me, how many others had heard it? His family? Our friends? His co-workers? Patricia's follow-up message appeared, I don't know what's happening, but Derek said Brandon's been saying stuff like this for weeks. I thought you deserved to know. Weeks. Not days. Weeks of carefully constructed lies, spread methodically through our social circles like poison in a well. I typed back, thank you. Nothing more. No explanation, no defense, no emotion. Because now I understood something crucial. This wasn't random. This was preparation. Brandon came home at 6:30 p.m. with takeout pasta from the Italian place I used to love. He smiled when he walked through the door, kissed my cheek, and asked how my day was. Fine, I said. Yours. Exhausting. He set the food on the counter and grabbed plates like this was just another Tuesday. Conference call ran 2 hours over. I'm starving. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He twirled pasta on his fork and told me about his boss's ridiculous deadline. He laughed at his own joke. He asked if I'd remembered to pay the electric bill. Normal. Casual. Easy. I watched him eat and talk and smile, and something inside me went completely still. This man had spent weeks telling people I was unstable. He'd whispered concerns about my mental health to colleagues and friends. He'd built an entire false narrative about who I was. And now he sat here asking about the electric bill. How long had he been doing this? How long had he looked me in the eye and lied this smoothly? Claire. He waved his hand. You okay? You seem distracted. Just tired, I said. He nodded sympathetically. You should get some rest. You've been working too hard. I smiled back. Maybe you're right. It happened during a commercial break while we watched a show neither of us cared about. Brandon's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it and smiled before typing a response. Who's that? I asked casually. Just Andy from work. He set the phone down. But 5 minutes later, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, he picked it up again and typed, Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Vanessa. Vanessa. Not Andy. Not a colleague I'd ever heard him mention. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face blank. I pretended to watch the television while my mind raced. He'd said her name so easily, without hesitation, like he'd been saying it for a long time. This wasn't a new affair. This was established. Comfortable. Routine. When he went to the bathroom, I grabbed his phone. No password. He'd never hidden it from me before because he'd never needed to. I found the messages immediately. Months of conversations. Dinner plans. Inside jokes. Photos I didn't want to see. And worse, messages about me. She doesn't understand me anymore. I feel trapped. You make me feel alive again. I put the phone back exactly where he'd left it. When he returned, I was still staring at the television, expression unchanged. You okay? He asked. Perfect, I said. I excused myself after the show ended, claiming a headache. Brandon nodded sympathetically and said he'd clean up the kitchen. In the bathroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection. My face looked the same as it had this morning, but everything underneath had shifted. My husband was cheating. He'd been smearing my name for weeks. He'd built a story where I was the problem, the unstable one, the reason things were falling apart. And he had no idea I knew any of it. My hands gripped the edge of the sink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw open the door and confront him with everything I'd discovered. I wanted to demand answers, explanations, apologies. But I didn't move. I stayed frozen in front of the mirror, breathing slowly, deliberately, until my pulse returned to normal. Confronting him would give him what he wanted. Drama. Proof that I was unstable. Evidence to support every lie he'd already told. If I confronted him now, I'd be playing his game. And he'd already spent weeks stacking the deck against me. So I wouldn't confront him. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not until I was ready. I washed my face, dried it carefully, and opened the door. Brandon was on the couch, scrolling his phone. Feeling better? He asked. Much better, I said. Before I explain what I did next, you need to understand who I was to Brandon when we met. I was Claire Hartley, financial analyst at Brennan & Associates. I was organized, calm, strategic. We married young. I was 26, he was 28. He worked in sales, had big dreams about starting his own company someday. I supported those dreams. I paid for his MBA. I covered expenses when his startup ideas failed. I was the steady one. The planner. The person who kept our life running smoothly while he chased opportunities. Somewhere along the way, that became a problem. My stability became boring. My planning became controlling. My support became suffocating. When his mother asked why we weren't having kids yet, he said I was too focused on work. When friends asked why he seemed stressed, he said I didn't understand his ambitions. When his sister suggested couples counseling, he said he'd tried, but I refused to change. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when the storyteller is charming and consistent. So by the time I discovered the affair, I'd already been rewritten. I wasn't Claire the supportive wife anymore. I was Claire the problem. His sister Jessica called on Wednesday evening. Brandon was still at work, or at least, that's where he said he was. Claire, hi. Her voice was careful, measured. I wanted to check in. Brandon mentioned you've been going through something. My grip tightened on the phone. Going through something? He said you've been stressed. Really stressed. Mom, and I think maybe counseling could help. Just for you, I mean. To work through whatever's happening. Just for me. Not couples counseling. Individual therapy. For my problems. My instability. My issues. That's thoughtful, I said calmly. But I'm fine. Are you sure? Because Brandon's really worried. He said you've been acting different. Distant. He thinks you might be struggling with something you're not talking about. I closed my eyes. He'd told his family. He'd convinced them I was the one falling apart. I appreciate your concern, Jessica. But I'm completely fine. Maybe Brandon's projecting his own stress onto me. There was a pause. Projecting. Work's been intense for him. Maybe he's the one who needs support. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, if you say so. But the offer stands. Mom knows a great therapist. Of course she did. Because Brandon had already prepared them for this exact conversation. After we hung up, I sat in silence, understanding something new. He wasn't just smearing me to co-workers and friends. He turned his own family against me, quietly, methodically, weeks or maybe months before I'd noticed anything wrong. Thursday morning, I checked our joint account while Brandon was in the shower. There were 3 withdrawals I didn't recognize, all labeled miscellaneous. $500. $700. Another $400. I opened the credit card statements next. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to. A hotel in the next city over. Jewelry from a boutique downtown. None of it for me. All of it recent. All of it while he'd been telling everyone I was the problem. I took screenshots of everything. I opened a new email account he didn't know about and sent copies to myself. Then I downloaded the banking app on an old phone I kept in my desk drawer and logged in using credentials he'd never think to check. Every transaction. Every charge. Every withdrawal labeled miscellaneous. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too hot, too unstable, too much like the woman he described to everyone. Instead, I felt cold. Methodical. Clear. If he was spending our money on her, I needed documentation. If he was preparing to leave, I needed proof. If he was planning something worse, trying to claim I was incompetent, trying to take control of our assets, I needed ammunition. When Brandon got out of the shower, I was making coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said, kissing my forehead. "Morning," I replied. Normal. Calm. Collected. Exactly what I needed to be. For the next 5 days, I became a different version of myself. Not the version Brandon described to others. Something quieter. Something patient. I stopped asking where he'd been. I stopped checking his phone. I stopped reacting to anything he said that didn't add up. Instead, I pulled bank statements going back 2 years. I made spreadsheets tracking expenses. I documented every discrepancy, every unexplained charge, every withdrawal that didn't match our agreed budget. I requested copies of all insurance policies. I logged into our investment accounts and took screenshots of every portfolio, every balance. I made a list of every shared asset, the house, the cars, the retirement accounts, the savings bonds. I didn't cry. I didn't vent to friends. I didn't post vague messages on social media. I didn't give Brandon a single reason to think I was falling apart. At work, I smiled. I completed projects ahead of schedule. When Amanda asked how I was doing, I said, "Great, thanks." At home, I cooked dinner. I asked about Brandon's day. I was pleasant, steady, unremarkable. And every night, after he fell asleep, I added more documents to my file. The attorney's office was 20 miles outside of town, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Her name was Pamela Reeves, and she came highly recommended by a college friend who'd been through a difficult divorce. I brought everything: printed statements, screenshots, timelines, a list of assets. I laid it all on her desk like evidence in a trial. Pamela reviewed the first document, a bank statement showing the miscellaneous withdrawals, and went completely still. She looked up at me, then back at the paper. "Did he know you'd see this?" she asked. "I don't think so. He doesn't think I pay attention." She flipped through more pages. The hotel charges. The jewelry purchases. The restaurant bills. Then she found the investment account printout and paused again. "This account is in both names?" "Yes." "And this one?" "Also both names. Technically joint assets, but I manage them. He stopped paying attention years ago." Pamela leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Hartley, your husband appears to have made a critical miscalculation." "What do you mean?" "He assumed you wouldn't notice. Or wouldn't care. Or wouldn't do anything about it." She tapped the investment statement. "This portfolio alone changes everything. If you file first, before he realizes you're paying attention, we can freeze these assets before he tries to move them." Filing first. The phrase hung in the air between us. "How quickly can we move?" I asked. Pamela smiled. "How's Tuesday morning?" I signed the papers on a Tuesday at 9 a.m., exactly 1 week after my first consultation with Pamela. No hesitation. No second thoughts. No dramatic moment of doubt. Brandon thought I was at work. My boss thought I had a dentist appointment. Nobody knew where I actually was. Pamela had prepared everything perfectly. Divorce petition. Asset freeze request. Temporary restraining order on joint accounts. Documentation supporting every claim. Once these are filed, she explained, he'll be served within 48 hours. Probably at work. He won't have advance warning. He won't have time to move money or hide assets. Good, I said. She looked at me carefully. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we file, there's no taking it back quietly. I thought about the screenshots on my phone. The weeks of lies. The affair he thought I didn't know about. The narrative he'd built where I was unstable and difficult and the problem. I'm sure, I said. I signed my name 23 times. Each signature felt like taking back something he tried to steal, my reputation, my stability, my future. When I walked out of that office, the September sun was bright and warm. I drove to work, parked in my usual spot, and walked into the building like it was just another Tuesday. Nobody knew. Not yet. But by Thursday, everyone would. Brandon was served with divorce papers on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. in the lobby of his office building. I know the exact time because Pamela called me immediately after the process server confirmed delivery. It's done, she said. He has the papers. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed with her message. I glanced at it, set it face down on the table, and continued presenting the quarterly financial projections like nothing had happened. But across town, Brandon's world was imploding. He called me 14 times in 20 minutes. I didn't answer. He sent texts. What the hell is this? Call me now. We need to talk. This is insane. I silenced my phone and finished my presentation. By the time I checked my messages during lunch, there were 37 missed calls and twice as many texts. His tone had shifted from angry to confused to almost pleading. Claire, please. We can work this out. Just call me. I deleted every message without responding. Pamela had been clear, any communication should go through her. Brandon didn't get to control the narrative anymore. He didn't get to spin this into another story where I was the unreasonable one. He'd thought he had time. Time to plan his exit. Time to secure his affair. Time to finish destroying my reputation so thoroughly that when he finally left, everyone would understand why. But I'd filed first. And now he was scrambling. By Friday, cracks were appearing in Brandon's carefully constructed story. He tried to rewrite the narrative again, telling anyone who would listen that I'd filed for divorce out of nowhere, without warning, completely unstable just like he'd said. But timelines are stubborn things. They don't cooperate with lies. People started asking questions. If I was so unstable, why had I been perfectly fine at work all week? If our marriage was so troubled, why hadn't he mentioned wanting a divorce himself? If I was the problem, why was I the one who filed? His explanations didn't add up. He said I'd changed suddenly. But co-workers remembered me being calm and professional for months. He said I'd refused counseling. But his sister Jessica accidentally mentioned that he'd never actually suggested it to me. Each lie bumped against a fact and came apart. Amanda from accounting approached me in the break room. Hey, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About before. About what I said. I looked at her carefully. What changed your mind? She shifted uncomfortably. Brandon's been saying contradictory things. And you've been so normal through all of this. I don't know. Something didn't feel right. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. Word spread quickly after that. If Amanda had noticed the contradictions, others would too. Brandon's mask was slipping, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On Monday morning, Brandon was called into a meeting with HR. Not me. Him. I found out later through Patricia's husband Derek. The company had received complaints about Brandon discussing personal matters at work and creating an uncomfortable environment. Outside conflicts affecting professionalism was the official phrase. They didn't fire him. But they put him on notice. Any further discussions about his personal life at work would result in formal disciplinary action. Brandon was furious. He called me that afternoon, breaking the no-contact agreement. You turned my own company against me, he shouted into the voicemail. You're trying to destroy my career. This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I was talking about. I forwarded the voicemail to Pamela without listening to it twice. She responded within an hour, perfect. This helps us. Brandon still didn't understand what was happening. He still thought he could control the story. He still believed his version would win out if he just told it loudly enough. But stories need consistency. They need proof. They need people to believe them. And slowly, Brandon's story was falling apart while mine remained the same, calm, factual, documented. The narrative was reversing. And he couldn't stop it. During our marriage, I'd opened a brokerage account to invest a small inheritance for my grandmother. Brandon had dismissed it as your thing, barely glancing at the statements when they arrived. You handle the boring financial stuff, he'd said. I trust you. That trust, or more accurately, that disinterest, had been a mistake on his part. Over 8 years, I'd grown that account from $40,000 to nearly $200,000 through careful strategic investments. The account was in my name only, opened before our marriage, funded with my inheritance. But during our marriage, I'd made one critical decision. I'd transferred it into a joint investment account for tax purposes, mixing my inheritance with small contributions from our joint savings. Brandon had signed the paperwork without reading it. He'd never asked about the balance. He'd never checked the statements. Now, in the divorce proceedings, that account was suddenly very interesting to him. His attorney sent a letter claiming Brandon was entitled to half the balance. After all, it had been converted to a joint account during the marriage. Community property laws applied. Pamela smiled when she showed me the letter. Do you have documentation showing the original inheritance amount and every deposit after that? Of course, I said. I'd kept every record, every statement, every transaction detail for 8 years. Then we'll show that 93% of that account came from your separate property. He gets 7%. If he wants to fight about it. Brandon had underestimated what I understood. Again. The deposition was scheduled for October 15th. Brandon arrived with his attorney, confident and composed. He still believed he could charm his way through this, that his version of events would sound more convincing than mine. Pamela questioned him methodically. Where was he on specific dates? Who was he with? What were the charges on the credit card for? Brandon answered smoothly at first. Business dinners. Client meetings. Work events. Then Pamela showed him the hotel receipt from August 12th. Can you explain this charge? The Riverside Hotel, 1 night, charged to your personal credit card. Business trip, he said quickly. But you told Mrs. Hartley you were visiting your brother in Portland that weekend. Pause. Right. I stopped at the hotel on the way back. The hotel is 30 miles from here. Portland is 300 miles north. Why would you stop here on the way back? Another pause. Longer. I don't remember exactly. It was months ago. Pamela pulled out another document. Cell phone records showing his location pinging off towers near the hotel all night. Not in Portland. Here. Brandon's attorney called for a break. When they returned, Brandon had changed his story. He admitted he hadn't been in Portland. He'd needed space to think. He'd stayed at the hotel alone. But Pamela had restaurant receipts showing 2 meals ordered to the room. 2 glasses of wine. 2 entrees. Were you alone, Mr. Hartley? His jaw tightened. I'd like to take the 5th. This isn't a criminal proceeding. You can't take the 5th. Brandon contradicted himself 3 more times that day. Each lie bumped against a documented fact and crumbled. Arrogance always leaks. And Brandon's was flooding the room. Through everything, I'd expected to stand alone. Brandon had spent months turning people against me. But something strange happened as the divorce progressed. People started reaching out. Quietly. Carefully. Samantha, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years, sent a text. I heard what's happening. I'm here if you need anything. My neighbor Carol left a casserole on my porch with a note, thinking of you. Even Patricia invited me to coffee. I just wanted to say I believe you. What he did, spreading those lies, that was wrong. These weren't grand gestures. Nobody posted public support. Nobody confronted Brandon directly. But they showed up in small, meaningful ways. And the people Brandon thought would stand by him? They started drifting away. His weekly basketball game quietly disbanded. His brother stopped returning calls as frequently. Even his sister Jessica called me once to say, I'm sorry I didn't listen before. Brandon was standing alone now. Not because I'd turned people against him, but because his own lies had isolated him. Truth has a way of surfacing. And when it does, people choose sides based on consistency, not charm. I hadn't campaigned for support. I'd simply stayed steady, factual, quiet. And somehow, that was enough. Vanessa, the woman Brandon had been seeing for months, was supposed to provide a character witness statement. His attorney had mentioned it during preliminary discussions, suggesting she could testify about Brandon's state of mind, his unhappiness in the marriage. The deposition was scheduled for October 22nd. Vanessa didn't show up. Brandon's attorney called her repeatedly. No answer. They drove to her apartment. She'd moved out 3 days earlier, leaving no forwarding address. Her social media accounts went dark. Her phone number was disconnected. She'd simply vanished. Brandon looked shaken when his attorney informed him. He'd thought Vanessa was permanent, that their relationship was real, that she'd stand by him through this. But she disappeared the moment things got difficult. The moment the affair stopped being exciting and started having consequences. I watched Brandon's face during the hearing when his attorney explained her absence. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The confident man who'd walked into this process had been replaced by someone who was starting to understand what he'd actually lost. Not just me. Not just the marriage. But the future he'd imagined with Vanessa. She'd been temporary. A distraction. Someone who wanted the fun parts of an affair without the messy aftermath. And now Brandon was sitting in a courtroom, alone, realizing too late that temporary people disappear when you need them most. The settlement negotiation was scheduled for November 3rd. Brandon's attorney had been confident going into it, suggesting a 50-50 split of all assets, standard community property division. But when Pamela laid out our documentation, the investment accounts, the inheritance records, the credit card statements showing his affair spending, the bank withdrawals he tried to hide, the numbers shifted. The house we'd purchased together would be sold, proceeds split evenly. Fair. The cars were divided based on who'd paid for them. I kept mine. He kept his. The retirement accounts were split according to contributions. Since I'd contributed significantly more over the years, I walked away with substantially more. And the investment account he'd ignored for years? After proving that 93% came from my separate property inheritance, he got 7%. About $14,000. He'd been expecting $100,000. His attorney asked for a recess. They huddled in the corner, whispering urgently. Brandon's face had gone red, then pale. When they returned, his attorney made a counteroffer. Pamela rejected it calmly, pointing to specific documentation that supported our position. Another recess. More whispering. Finally, they agreed to our terms. Not because they wanted to, but because the facts didn't support Brandon's narrative anymore. This wasn't in his plan. He'd thought he'd walk away with half of everything, start fresh with Vanessa, live the life he'd been building in secret. Instead, he was leaving with significantly less than he'd expected and no Vanessa waiting for him. The final settlement took 3 weeks to process. During that time, Brandon's social circle collapsed entirely. Friends stopped calling him. Invitations to parties dried up. The guys from his basketball league made plans without him. Even his co-workers kept their distance. Nobody confronted him directly. There was no dramatic intervention, no public shaming. People just quietly stepped back. And Brandon blamed me. I heard through Derek that Brandon was telling anyone who'd listened that I'd turned everyone against him, that I'd run a smear campaign, that I destroyed his reputation. But I hadn't said anything. Not to friends, not to co-workers, not to anyone. I'd stayed quiet, let the facts speak, let people draw their own conclusions. The truth was simpler than Brandon wanted to admit. People had watched him lie for months. They'd seen his stories change and contradict. They'd witnessed him blame his wife publicly while cheating privately. And they'd chosen not to associate with that behavior anymore. I didn't take his friends. His own actions did that. I didn't destroy his reputation. He'd done that himself. All I'd done was refuse to play the role he'd written for me. The final agreement arrived on November 28th. Pamela brought it to my office personally. 247 pages of legal documentation outlining exactly how our shared life would be divided. I read every single line. Every clause, every stipulation, every dollar amount. I took my time, checking details against the notes I'd kept throughout the process. Pamela watched patiently. You don't have to read it all right now. You can take it home, review it over the weekend. I want to be sure, I said. And I was. Every asset accounted for. Every shared account closed. Every tie between Brandon and me legally severed except for the final sale of the house, which would be handled by a third party. I signed my name on the final page at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The same day of the week I'd filed the initial papers 2 months earlier. Pamela witnessed my signature, then filed the documents electronically. It's done, Claire. You're officially divorced. I'd expected to feel something dramatic. Relief or sadness or anger. Instead, I felt quiet. Steady. Clear. Freedom wasn't loud or emotional. It was simply the absence of lies, the end of pretending, the ability to move forward without someone actively working against me. I thanked Pamela, gathered my things, and walked out of her office into the cool November evening. The air felt different. Cleaner, somehow. For the first time in months, I could breathe all the way in. I saw Brandon one last time in the courthouse hallway 3 weeks later. We were both there to sign final documents related to the house sale. Our attorneys had arranged separate appointment times, but his had run late. We passed each other near the elevator. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The confident man who'd smiled while lying to my face had been replaced by someone diminished, uncertain. We made eye contact for less than 2 seconds. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. He pressed the elevator button and stared at the floor. I continued walking toward Pamela's office without looking back. No dramatic confrontation. No final words. No closure scene where I told him exactly how he'd hurt me or demanded an apology he'd never mean. Just 2 people passing in a hallway, strangers now, connected only by paperwork and a past that no longer defined me. Later, Pamela asked if I was okay after seeing him. I'm fine, I said. And I meant it. Because closure doesn't require conversation. It doesn't need explanations or apologies or acknowledgement. Sometimes closure is simply walking past someone who once controlled your life and feeling absolutely nothing. Brandon lost more than money in the divorce. He'd expected that. What he hadn't anticipated was losing everything else. His credibility was gone. People who'd known him for years now questioned every story he told, every explanation he gave. He'd lied so consistently for so long that nobody trusted his word anymore. His social access vanished. Invitations stopped coming. Friend groups moved on without him. Professional networking events felt awkward as people remembered the whisper campaign he'd run against his own wife. And control, the thing he'd valued most, was completely gone. He couldn't rewrite the narrative anymore. The facts were documented, filed, public record. His version of events had been exposed as fiction. He'd thought he was preparing for a clean exit, a fresh start, a better life with Vanessa. Instead, he'd lost his marriage, his credibility, most of his assets, his affair partner, and the respect of nearly everyone who knew him. Meanwhile, I'd gained something better than revenge. I'd gained clarity, peace, control over my own future. The investment accounts were mine. The reputation I'd carefully rebuilt was mine. The life I was creating, free from someone actively undermining me, was mine. I hadn't destroyed Brandon. I'd simply refused to be destroyed by him. And somehow, that had been the most powerful response of all. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my life looked remarkably similar to how it had before. Same job at Brennan and Associates. Same morning coffee routine. But everything underneath had changed. My name was clear. The whispers had stopped. Co-workers treated me with respect again. Work felt lighter without the constant fear that Brandon was somewhere spreading new lies. My finances were stable, better than they'd been during the marriage. Without Brandon's spending draining our accounts, I'd started saving aggressively. The investment portfolio I'd protected was growing steadily. I'd reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from. Samantha and I met for coffee every other week. Carol and I shared dinner occasionally. Simple, honest friendships. And I had peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from not wondering what someone's saying about you behind your back or what financial disaster you'll discover next. My life wasn't dramatically different. It was simply mine again. Thriving quietly, I'd learned, is the loudest response you can give to someone who tried to destroy you. People sometimes ask if I took revenge on Brandon. If I plotted to ruin him, to turn people against him, to destroy everything he valued. The answer is no. I didn't take revenge. I took control. I didn't spread lies about him. I simply stopped pretending his lies were true. I didn't turn people against him. I let his own actions speak for themselves. I didn't destroy his future. I protected mine. When someone tries to destroy your name, the temptation is to fight back loudly, to defend yourself publicly, to make sure everyone knows the truth. But that's exhausting. And it rarely works the way you want it to. What works is this: stay calm. Document everything. Let facts build your case while lies tear theirs down. File first. Protect your assets. Walk away clean. Brandon spent months building a narrative where I was unstable, difficult, the problem. He told that story to everyone who would listen. But narratives need consistency. And lies, no matter how well rehearsed, eventually contradict themselves. All I had to do was stay steady, factual, quiet, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. When someone tries to destroy your name, let them. Just make sure they can't touch your future. Because in the end, your future is the only thing that truly matters.